Have you ever woken up to a nightmare so horrifying that it blurs the line between reality and terror? Imagine opening your eyes in the dead of night, the darkness pressing in around you, only to realize that the person lying next to you, the one you love and trust, is no longer breathing. Their life has been stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. Panic sets in. Your heart pounds as you fumble for the phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. But just as you whisper for help, a new terror grips you. Footsteps, slow and measured. Someone else is inside the house. This is not just a nightmare. This is exactly what happened to Melissa Oxley on February 21st, 2008. When the police arrived at the scene, they found no signs of forced entry, no weapon, and no intruder in sight. The only people inside the home were Melissa, her 6-year-old stepdaughter Alyssa, and the victim, Ben Oxley, shot dead in his sleep. All evidence seemed to point to Melissa. But then, days later, little Alyssa broke her silence. She had seen everything that night, and what she revealed turned the entire investigation on its head. Was this the work of a cold-blooded killer within the home? A setup? A crime of passion? Or was something far more ominous at play? Welcome to Crime Docket, where we uncover the darkest mysteries and shocking twists behind real-life crimes. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications because you won't want to miss what happens next. Now, let's dive into the chilling case of Ben Oxley's murder, where the truth came from the most unexpected witness. It was 3:30 a.m. on February 21st, 2008, when Melissa Oxley's frantic voice shattered the silence of the police dispatch line. "My husband's been shot. I just woke up and oh my God, he's dead. Please, someone's in the house. Please hurry." Her voice trembled with terror. The words barely made it past the lump in her throat as she clutched her 6-year-old stepdaughter, Alyssa, close. The little girl's body shivered against hers, her tiny hands gripping Melissa's shirt, seeking comfort. But there was no comfort to be found, just an all-consuming, bone-deep fear. In the suffocating darkness of the bedroom, Melissa's pulse pounded in her ears. The horror of what lay beside her made it impossible to breathe. Ben, her husband, her best friend, her protector, was gone. His body lay motionless on the bed, his face frozen in time. The metallic scent of blood filled the room, thick and inescapable. Then, from downstairs was a sound. Footsteps, slow, heavy, and unmistakable. Melissa's breath hitched. The phone shook in her grasp as she whispered into the receiver, her voice barely audible. "I hear someone downstairs. Please hurry." The dispatcher's voice was calm, instructing her to stay on the line. But Melissa barely heard it over the deafening thrum of her own heartbeat. She squeezed Alyssa tighter, shielding her, waiting for the nightmare to get worse. Minutes stretched into eternity, and then silence. The footsteps had stopped. Every muscle in Melissa's body tensed as she strained to listen. Was whoever it was still in the house, hiding, watching? Then, sirens flashing red and blue lights danced across the windows. The sound of car doors slamming shut. The cavalry had arrived. The front door burst open as officers stormed inside, weapons drawn. Melissa heard them moving through the house, clearing each room, their voices sharp and controlled. Then a shout, all clear. Melissa felt the breath she hadn't realized she was holding escape her lungs. But relief was short-lived. No signs of forced entry, no shattered windows, no broken locks, and no footprints in the freshly fallen snow outside. No intruder in sight. Yet, Ben Oxley was dead and shot at point-blank range while he slept beside his wife. When the officers entered the bedroom, their faces hardened at the scene before them. The crime was brutal, the execution chilling. Ben's body was undisturbed, his expression almost peaceful. There was no evidence of a struggle, no sign that he had even woken up before the fatal shot was fired. Melissa sat on the floor, Alyssa wrapped in her arms, both of them visibly shaken. When the officers gently led Alyssa away to another room, Melissa looked up at them with wide, tear-filled eyes. "I didn't do this," she whispered, as if the thought had only just occurred to her. "I was sleeping right next to him. I would have woken up. I didn't hear anything." Her words hung in the air. How could she not have woken up? A shotgun blast at close range wasn't subtle. The deafening explosion should have shaken the entire house. The fact that Melissa had remained asleep until the moment she woke up to discover Ben's lifeless body raised immediate suspicion. Detectives scanned the room, their minds racing through the possibilities. There was no sign of a struggle. Ben hadn't fought back. He hadn't even stirred. Did that mean he had been drugged? Was Melissa truly asleep, or had she been covering her tracks? The questions began stacking up faster than they could be answered. As the crime scene unit scoured the house for evidence, detectives began their initial questioning. "When was the last time you saw your husband alive?" one of them asked Melissa. She swallowed hard, still clutching herself as if she were freezing. "Last night, we went to bed around 11. Did he seem different? Was he acting unusual?" She shook her head. No, he was fine, just normal. Normal, a word that no longer applied to their home. One detective frowned, looking around. "You're sure the doors were locked?" "Yes," she said quickly. "Always." But if the doors were locked, how did the killer get inside? There was no sign of forced entry. No broken locks or jimmied windows. The house was secure. That left only two possibilities. The murderer had been let in, or they had never left. As detectives processed the crime scene, the theory that this was a break-in gone wrong quickly crumbled. Nothing had been stolen. The house wasn't ransacked. The killer had come for one reason: to kill Ben Oxley, and that meant it was personal. The first and most obvious suspect, the person lying next to him when he was murdered. Melissa Oxley. Her story was full of holes. She hadn't woken up to the gunshot. She had only called 911 after discovering the body, despite claiming she heard footsteps downstairs. And if someone else had been in the house, why had they left without harming her? As the hours dragged on, the investigators' scrutiny intensified. They watched Melissa's every movement, dissected every word she spoke. Was she a grieving widow, or was she a murderer putting on an act? Just as detectives began preparing to bring Melissa in for deeper questioning, a new voice broke the silence. Alyssa. The 6-year-old girl had been the only other person awake in the house that night, and she had seen something. Detectives knelt before her, their voices soft but urgent. "Sweetheart, did you see anything? Did you hear anything?" Alyssa hesitated. Her small fingers twisted in her lap, her little lips trembled, and then, in a barely audible whisper, she spoke. "I saw who did it." Every detective in the room froze. Alyssa looked down, her voice shaking. It wasn't Melissa. For the first time, the case took a shocking turn, because according to the only eyewitness that night, the killer wasn't inside the house at all. The real murderer was someone the police never saw coming. Stay tuned as the investigation unravels a twisted tale of jealousy, revenge, and a shocking betrayal that no one could have predicted. From the moment detectives stepped into the Oxley home, their suspicions zeroed in on Melissa. She claimed to have slept through the entire incident until she woke up next to Ben's lifeless body. But how could she not have heard the deafening blast of a shotgun fired at such close range? Was it fear clouding her memory, or was she hiding something? Detectives found this hard to believe. A shotgun blast at close range should have woken her up instantly. Yet, she heard nothing? It defied logic. The force of the blast had sent blood spatter across the room, staining the sheets, the walls, even Melissa herself. And yet, she insisted she had slept through it all. Melissa was taken in for questioning. Her demeanor was eerily calm. Her story remained the same. She went to bed with Ben, she woke up covered in blood, and she had no idea what had happened. She pleaded with investigators, insisting she would never harm Ben. They had a happy marriage. There were no signs of a struggle, no previous reports of domestic issues. But with no signs of forced entry, no missing valuables, and no clear evidence of an outside intruder, all clues pointed back to her. As investigators examined her closely, doubts grew. Melissa had no gunpowder residue on her hands or clothes. There was no forensic evidence linking her directly to the murder weapon. Was it possible she had truly been asleep? If so, who else could have entered the house that night without leaving a trace? Detectives pressed her, trying to break through any deception. They scoured her past, searching for hidden motives, financial troubles, or secret affairs. But nothing stood out. The case seemed to stall, lingering in the eerie silence of unanswered questions. Then Alyssa spoke. Melissa's 6-year-old stepdaughter had been in the house that night, a child so young, yet the only other witness to the gruesome crime. At first, she had remained quiet, clinging to Melissa, overwhelmed by the chaos surrounding her. But as the hours passed and the detectives gently encouraged her, Alyssa's small voice revealed a chilling truth. "I saw someone," she whispered. The room fell silent. Every investigator turned toward her. Melissa's breath hitched as she listened, wide-eyed. Alyssa hesitated, glancing at Melissa before continuing. "I was awake. I heard something and got scared." "What did you see, sweetheart?" one detective asked gently. Alyssa took a deep breath. "A person standing by Daddy's bed. They had a gun, and then bang! Daddy didn't wake up." Melissa gasped, her hands trembling. "Who was it, Alyssa? Did you see their face?" Alyssa's little brow furrowed as she tried to remember. I think it was a woman." A collective shiver passed through the room. If it wasn't Melissa, then who? And why would a woman want Ben dead? The pieces of the puzzle had shifted. The focus of the investigation took a sharp turn. Detectives no longer looked at Melissa as the sole suspect. There was another player in this deadly game. Someone who had walked into that house undetected, committed a brutal execution, and vanished into the darkness without a trace. But who and why? The answers lay in the past, and the truth was about to surface in the most shocking way possible. With Alyssa's confession, detectives tried to figure out which woman could want Ben dead. The first person that came to mind was Ben's ex-wife, so they dug into Dawn's life, searching for anything that might reveal her motive or tie her to the murder. What they found was a history of volatile behavior. Dawn had been arrested before for domestic disturbances. Friends and neighbors reported hearing screaming matches between her and Ben in the past. But there was more, something much darker. A few months before Ben's murder, he had fought for full custody of Alyssa. He had wanted to remove her from Dawn's unstable home life. Dawn had lost that battle, and now Ben was gone. Melissa sat in shock as detectives pieced everything together. Dawn had every reason to hate Ben, every reason to want him out of the picture. But could she really have pulled the trigger? Then, a new piece of evidence surfaced, a chilling discovery that would shake the case to its core. A neighbor, reviewing security footage from the night of the murder, had caught something unusual. A figure, cloaked in shadows, walking toward the Oxley residence at 2:45 a.m. The timestamp matched the estimated time of the shooting. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough to intensify the search. The next step was confronting Dawn. Detectives arrived at her home, where she feigned shock and grief, playing the role of a concerned mother. As the interrogation continued, Dawn's carefully constructed facade began to crack, and with every inconsistency in her story, the truth inched closer to the surface. Dawn Oxley had been furious when Ben won full custody of Alyssa. To her, it was the ultimate betrayal, a final crushing blow in a battle she had been losing for years. Their relationship had been a ticking time bomb from the start, filled with fights that neighbors could hear through the walls, accusations that painted them both in an ugly light, and restraining orders that spoke volumes about the chaos behind closed doors. Ben had left her, not out of simple, irreconcilable differences, but because he feared for his safety, and more importantly for Alyssa's. Dawn resented him for that. She resented Melissa even more. To her, Melissa wasn't just Ben's wife. She was the woman who had replaced her, the woman who was now raising her daughter. And that hatred festered. As police dug deeper, they found chilling evidence of Dawn's obsession. Friends and coworkers recalled her growing bitterness, how every conversation somehow circled back to Ben. She spoke about him with venom, seething about how he had stolen Alyssa from her, how unfair it was that she had lost everything. One friend recalled a particularly unsettling conversation where Dawn had said, through clenched teeth, "I swear to God, I wish he was gone for good." Was this just the desperate, grief-stricken ranting of a mother who had lost her child? Or was it something more? Was this a confession in disguise, a glimpse into a carefully hidden plan? Detectives couldn't ignore it. The case against Dawn was growing stronger, but they needed more than words. They needed a solid proof, something that would place her at the scene of the crime that night. A breakthrough came when investigators traced Dawn's phone records at 2:30 a.m. Just an hour before the shooting, Dawn's phone had pinged off a cell tower near Ben's house. She had no reason to be there at that hour, at least. No innocent reason. But it wasn't just her phone that gave her away. A neighbor had also come forward, mentioning a strange sight from the night of the murder. He had been returning home late when he saw a car parked down the street from the Oxley home. At first, he thought nothing of it until he saw a shadowy figure step out and walks toward Ben's house. The figure was dressed in dark clothing, moving with careful, deliberate steps. The neighbor didn't think much of it at the time, assuming it was someone visiting. But now, knowing what had happened, he was sure whoever that was, they hadn't been there for a friendly visit. Detectives knew they were closing in. They needed to confront Dawn directly. When they arrived at her house, she answered the door with an expression of feigned concern, playing the part of a grieving mother. "Any news on who did this?" she asked, her voice a perfect balance of worry and curiosity. But the detectives went further to question her. They questioned her about her whereabouts, about her cell phone records, about the car seen near Ben's house that night. Dawn's responses grew defensive and erratic. She contradicted herself, shifting between denial and anger. "You don't have any proof," she snapped at one point, her voice breaking under the weight of her own lies. "You can't prove I was there." But they were getting closer, and Dawn knew it. As detectives left, one thing was certain. Dawn was hiding something, and it was only a matter of time before the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The truth was coming for her, and she was running out of places to hide. Investigators soon discovered that Dawn had borrowed a shotgun just days before the murder. The ballistics matched perfectly, leaving no doubt that the weapon used to kill Ben had been in her possession. This was the first major breakthrough in the case, but what truly sealed her fate was Alyssa's testimony. The little girl's words were haunting. Under careful questioning, Alyssa recounted the events of that night with chilling precision. She had seen her mother inside the house. At first, she thought she was dreaming, but the eerie presence of Dawn standing over her father's bed was all too real. Dawn had entered through an unlocked sliding door at the back of the house, moving carefully to avoid making any noise. Her heart pounded as she stepped through the familiar hallways she once called home. Past her sleeping daughter's room, she crept, her fingers tightening around the shotgun she had borrowed days before. She knew exactly where she was going. Inside the bedroom, Ben and Melissa lay sound asleep. Dawn stood over them, staring at the man who had taken everything from her. Her marriage, her daughter, her sense of control. The bitterness, the hatred, the resentment boiled inside her until it erupted in one fatal moment. She raised the shotgun, aimed it at Ben's head, and pulled the trigger. The deafening blast shook the house. Melissa stirred beside him, but Dawn didn't stay to watch. She turned and fled the scene, slipping back out the same way she had entered. Melissa awoke moments later, covered in blood, her ears still ringing from the explosion. Disoriented and terrified, she turned to Ben, shaking him, screaming his name. But he was already gone. She scrambled to grab the phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed 911. "My husband's been shot! I just woke up and oh my God, he's dead. Please, someone's in the house. Please hurry." As she huddled with Alyssa in a corner of the bedroom, she could still hear faint noises downstairs. But when police arrived, there was no intruder. No sign of forced entry. Just Ben's lifeless body and a terrified wife who couldn't explain how she had slept through a gunshot at point-blank range. The evidence against Dawn mounted. Investigators traced her phone records and found calls made near the crime scene around the time of the murder. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station captured her purchasing fuel shortly before the estimated time of death. Witnesses came forward, recalling how she had spoken of her hatred toward Ben and how she wished he would just disappear. As detectives pieced together the timeline, it became evident that Dawn had meticulously planned this attack. The borrowed shotgun, the knowledge of the unlocked door, the silent approach through the house, and everything pointed to premeditation. With overwhelming evidence against her, Dawn Oxley was arrested and charged with Ben's murder. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family members, and curious onlookers eager to witness the unfolding of justice. The air was thick with tension as Dawn sat at the defendant's table, her expression cold and unreadable. The most heartbreaking moment of the trial came when Alyssa, just a child, took the stand. Holding tightly to a small stuffed animal for comfort, she looked out at the courtroom, her small frame trembling under the weight of the moment. The prosecutor guided her gently, ensuring she felt safe as she recounted the horrific events of that night. "It wasn't Missy," Alyssa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was my mom." A hushed murmur spread through the courtroom. Melissa, who had endured weeks of suspicion and scrutiny, wiped away silent tears as she watched the young girl relive her trauma. The prosecution presented undeniable evidence. Ballistics confirming that the borrowed shotgun matched the murder weapon, testimonies from Dawn's acquaintances about her threats against Ben, and surveillance footage placing her near the Oxley home on the night of the murder. The defense tried to argue that there was no direct evidence linking Dawn to the crime scene, but Alyssa's testimony proved to be the damning piece that sealed her fate. As the trial neared its conclusion, Dawn showed no remorse. Her eyes remained devoid of emotion, as if she had already accepted her fate. She had thought she would get away with it. She had assumed that Melissa would take the fall. But in the end, justice found its way through the most unexpected witness, her own daughter. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before reaching a verdict. The moment the judge read aloud, "Guilty," a collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Melissa clutched her chest, finally free from the nightmare of suspicion that had loomed over her since that fateful night. Dawn was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She showed no reaction as the gavel slammed down, sealing her fate. The once confident woman who had plotted a cold-blooded murder now faced the consequences of her actions. For Melissa, justice brought closure, but it could never erase the scars left behind. The trauma of waking up beside her murdered husband, of being suspected of the crime, and of enduring the grueling investigation would haunt her for the rest of her life. As for Alyssa, she was left with a pain no child should ever have to bear. In one tragic moment, she had lost both parents, one to murder, the other to a prison sentence. Though she was placed in the care of loving relatives, the emotional toll of testifying against her own mother would be a wound that would take years to heal. The town of Minden, Nevada, would never forget the horror of that night, nor the resilience of a little girl whose bravery helped uncover the truth. Justice had been served, but at what cost? In the end, the case of Ben Oxley's murder became a stark reminder that sometimes the most unexpected voices hold the power to unveil the darkest truths, and that no matter how carefully one tries to manipulate the story, the truth always has a way of surfacing. Some crimes are solved by forensics, others by confessions, but in this case, it was the words of a brave 6-year-old girl that led to the truth. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more chilling true crime stories.